You might think that the greatest archaeological mysteries lie buried beneath the sands of Egypt or hidden in the jungles of Central America. But what if I told you that right here, scattered across landscapes you could visit tomorrow, there are sealed chambers, forbidden vaults, and locked repositories that have remained untouched for centuries? These aren't just empty rooms or forgotten storage spaces. They're time capsules that powerful institutions, ancient civilizations, and secretive orders decided should never be opened. Some were sealed by royal decree, others by religious authority. A few were locked away because what lay inside was simply too dangerous, too valuable, or too incomprehensible to reveal to the world. Tonight, we're going to explore the sealed vaults that continue to defy explanation, the locked chambers that historians argue about in hushed tones, and the forbidden repositories that might rewrite everything we think we know about human history. I'm talking about real places, documented sites, and tangible mysteries that you can look up right now on any map. We're going to walk through palaces where emperors forbade entry on pain of death. We'll stand before temple doors that haven't opened in 1,000 years. We'll examine underground complexes that modern governments refuse to excavate. And here's what makes these mysteries so compelling. We know they exist. We can measure them. We can photograph their sealed entrances. We can read the ancient warnings carved into their stone facades. But we cannot, or will not, look inside. Some of these vaults were sealed to protect sacred relics. Others to hide evidence of catastrophic events. Still others remain closed because of legends so terrifying that even skeptical scientists hesitate before suggesting we break the seals. You're going to hear theories that range from plausible to extraordinary, from mundane explanations to possibilities that challenge our entire understanding of the ancient world. We'll examine the evidence, weigh the competing hypotheses, and confront the uncomfortable questions that these sealed spaces force us to ask. Why would a civilization go to such extraordinary lengths to lock something away forever? What could be so important that it required massive stone blocks, copper seals, and cursed tablets to keep it hidden? And perhaps most unsettling of all, what happens if we finally decide to look inside? So settle in, because for the next hour, we're going to descend into vaults that time forgot, examine doors that were meant to stay closed, and ask the questions that archaeologists whisper about but rarely publish. Welcome to the sealed vault mysteries that continue to haunt the edges of human knowledge. Picture yourself standing in the Padmanabhaswamy Temple in Kerala, India, where beneath your feet lies a vault that has sparked international controversy and ignited imaginations across the globe. This isn't some forgotten tomb in a remote desert. This is an active Hindu temple in a modern Indian city, visited by thousands of devotees every year, and yet locked within its foundation is a chamber sealed by such powerful religious authority that the Indian Supreme Court itself has debated whether it should ever be opened. The temple dates back at least to the 8th century CE, though local traditions claim it stands on foundations far older, perhaps as ancient as the 3rd millennium BC. The structure you see today, with its towering gopuram reaching 100 feet into the humid Kerala sky, was largely rebuilt in the 16th century under the Travancore royal family. But it's what happened in 2011 that thrust this ancient temple into the modern spotlight. When a Supreme Court-ordered audit began examining the temple's underground vaults, designated as Vault A, B, C, D, E, and F, the discoveries were nothing short of staggering. Vault A alone contained gold coins, precious stones, golden idols, and jewelry estimated at over $22 billion. That's not ancient currency. That's modern valuation. The sheer wealth recovered from just one chamber exceeded the GDP of small nations. Diamond-studded golden thrones, emerald necklaces weighing pounds, ancient coins from Rome and Mesopotamia. The inventory read like something from a fantasy novel. But here's where it gets tricky. Vault B, the largest and deepest of all the chambers, remains sealed. And unlike the others, this vault wasn't just locked with conventional means. According to temple priests and historical records, Vault B was sealed through a ritual process involving the chanting of sacred mantras, something the ancient texts call a naga bandham, or serpent binding. The massive iron door bears no conventional lock, no keyhole, no visible mechanism of any kind. The entrance is marked with the image of serpents, and warning inscriptions that forbid entry. The official explanation from the temple administration and the Travancore royal family is straightforward: Vault B is a sacred space whose sanctity must be preserved. They point to religious texts that describe the chamber as intimately connected to the deity's spiritual power, suggesting that to break the seal would be an act of profound sacrilege with consequences both theological and practical. The Travancore Maharajas, who managed the temple for centuries, maintained that the vault should never be opened, and many Hindu religious authorities agree. They argue that the chamber likely contains sacred items meant for ritual purposes, objects whose power derives from their undisturbed state. Some scholars support this view, noting that many Hindu temples contain sealed sanctums that represent the eternal, unchanging presence of the divine. Now, let's be fair to the alternative perspectives. Secular archaeologists and government officials have argued that Vault B should be opened for inventory purposes, proper preservation, and potential public display. They suggest that the religious objections, while culturally significant, shouldn't prevent a scientific examination of what may be India's greatest archaeological treasure. A 2015 Supreme Court ruling seemed to support this view, though it was later contested. The court argued that the vault's contents are national heritage, and that religious tradition alone cannot justify keeping them hidden from documentation and scholarship. But the mystery deepens when you examine the physical evidence. Architectural surveys using ground-penetrating radar in 2014 suggested that Vault B might actually be a natural cave formation that the temple was built around, rather than a constructed chamber. The readings showed irregularities in the rock structure and possible connected passages extending beneath the temple complex. Some researchers have proposed that the vault is actually the entrance to a much larger subterranean system, perhaps a network of natural caverns that the ancient builders incorporated into their sacred architecture. This theory gains credence when you consider Kerala's limestone geology, which is prone to cave formation, and historical accounts that describe the temple as being built over a sacred spring or underground water source. Then there are the legends, and these are where our mystery takes on that mythic quality that separates a mere locked room from a genuine enigma. Local tradition holds that Vault B cannot be opened by human hands because it was sealed through supernatural means. The story goes that the ancient priests who performed the closing ritual used specific sonic frequencies, particular mantras chanted in precise sequences, that caused the locking mechanism to engage through resonance. According to this belief, only the exact reverse sequence of sounds can unlock the door, and that knowledge has been lost for centuries. Skeptics dismiss this as obvious mythology, pointing out that claims of acoustic locks conveniently excuse the lack of any visible opening mechanism. But here's where things get genuinely interesting. There are documented examples of ancient acoustic engineering in Indian temples. The musical pillars of Hampi, the sound-focusing architecture of various South Indian temples, and the acoustic properties of Sanskrit chanting in stone chambers have all been studied and verified. Could the ancient builders have actually created a resonance-based locking system? It seems far-fetched, but not physically impossible. The myth also warns of catastrophic consequences should the vault be opened incorrectly. Floods, epidemics, and cosmic disasters are all predicted in various versions of the legend. Some accounts specify that the vault protects something that must remain contained, an object or substance whose release would bring calamity. This is standard curse narrative territory, of course, similar to warnings on Egyptian tombs or Aztec temples. But the specificity is noteworthy. The predictions aren't vague, bad luck, they describe particular disasters including tsunami-like flooding, which is especially ominous given Kerala's coastal location and tsunami risk. Did the ancient sealer know something about the vault's contents or location that made such warnings seem necessary? Or are these simply the standard deterrents that ancient cultures attached to any sacred space they wanted to keep inviolate? Still, for all the evidence and argumentation, nobody knows what lies behind that iron door. The architectural surveys couldn't penetrate deeply enough to reveal clear images. The court battles have stalled in appeals and religious exemptions. The priests remain adamant that opening the vault would violate sacred trust. And so Vault B remains sealed, perhaps containing nothing more than ritual objects and offerings, or perhaps hiding something that would reshape our understanding of ancient Indian civilization, trade networks, or religious practices. The $22 billion found in Vault A represents accumulation over centuries, gifts from pilgrims, offerings from kings, wealth donated by the faithful. But what if Vault B was never meant for accumulation? What if it was sealed in a single act, perhaps at a moment of crisis or transition, with contents that one generation decided the future should never see? Picture yourself in the temple courtyard at dawn, the Kerala humidity already thick in the air, the scent of incense drifting from the shrine. You walk down ancient stone steps, worn smooth by countless feet over countless years, descending into the cool darkness beneath the temple. And there, at the end of a narrow passage, you see the door. No lock. No handle. Just smooth iron marked with serpents and Sanskrit warnings, and beyond it, darkness. What would you do? Would you honor the religious prohibition? Would you demand scientific investigation? Or would you wonder, as so many have wondered, whether some doors were meant to stay closed for reasons we might not understand until it's too late? We still don't know what secrets Vault B protects, or whether those secrets are sacred relics or something else entirely, something that made ancient priests decide that the future should be kept in the dark. Thousands of miles away, in the heart of China's Shaanxi province, another sealed vault has captured imaginations and frustrated archaeologists for decades, but this one comes with the explicit prohibition of the Chinese government itself. The mausoleum of Emperor Qin Shi Huang, the man who unified China in 221 BC and created the empire that would define East Asian civilization, remains unexcavated despite being one of the most famous archaeological sites in the world. You know the terracotta warriors, those thousands of life-sized clay soldiers discovered by farmers in 1974, standing in formation as they had for over 2,000 years. But those warriors aren't the mausoleum. They're the perimeter guard. The actual tomb, the massive pyramid-shaped tumulus that rises 140 feet above the surrounding landscape and covers roughly 98 acres, has never been opened. And the Chinese Academy of Sciences has made it clear, there are no plans to open it in the foreseeable future. The historical context makes the site's significance clear. Qin Shi Huang wasn't just another emperor. He was the first to unify the warring states of China under a single rule, standardizing writing, currency, and measurements across a vast territory. He began the construction of the Great Wall. He buried scholars alive and burned books to enforce ideological conformity. He was obsessed with immortality, sending expeditions to find magical elixirs and spending decades constructing his burial complex. According to the ancient historian Sima Qian, writing about a century after the emperor's death in 210 BC, the tomb's construction required the labor of over 700,000 workers over 38 years. Sima Qian's account describes wonders that read like science fiction, a massive underground palace with a ceiling decorated to represent the night sky, complete with pearls arranged as stars. Rivers of mercury, mechanically flowing to represent the Yellow and Yangtze rivers. Crossbows rigged to automatically fire at anyone who entered. The bodies of the emperor's childless concubines, sealed inside to serve him in the afterlife. A treasure trove of riches representing the entire known world of ancient China. For centuries, scholars dismissed Sima Qian's description as exaggeration or myth. After all, mechanically flowing mercury rivers? Automatic crossbow defenses? It sounded like fantasy. But then in 1974, those farmers digging a well struck pottery fragments that turned out to be part of the terracotta army, and suddenly people started wondering whether Sima Qian had been telling the truth after all. The subsequent excavations of the warrior pits revealed craftsmanship and scale that matched the historian's claims about the tomb's ambition. Each warrior is unique, with individual facial features, hairstyles, and expressions. The level of detail extends to the tread on the soles of their shoes. Thousands of weapons were found, many still sharp after 2 millennia. Bronze chariots, intricate and precise, demonstrated engineering sophistication that surprised modern metallurgists. If the peripheral structures were this elaborate, what must the central tomb contain? But here's where it gets tricky. Modern testing has revealed something extraordinary. Soil samples from the tumulus mound show mercury concentrations 100 times higher than the surrounding area. The mercury levels form a pattern that matches the layout of major rivers in ancient China. Sima Qian's rivers of mercury weren't metaphorical. They were literal. The ancient Chinese actually created flowing mercury features inside the tomb. This raises immediate questions. Why? How did they create a flowing system that apparently still leaks mercury vapor 2,000 years later? And most pressingly, how dangerous is the tomb's interior? Mercury vapor is toxic. If the tomb really contains pools or rivers of mercury, opening it could release concentrated vapors that would be lethal to anyone inside. The preservation challenge becomes obvious. But the mercury question points to a deeper mystery. Ancient Chinese alchemists believed mercury was the key to immortality. The first emperor reportedly took mercury pills, which probably contributed to his death at age 49. Was the mercury in his tomb purely decorative, representing the empire's rivers? Or was it meant to serve some preservation purpose, perhaps even attempting to create an environment where the emperor's body could achieve the physical immortality he sought in life? The Chinese government's official position emphasizes preservation concerns. They argue, quite reasonably, that current technology cannot guarantee the safe excavation and preservation of the tomb's contents. The warriors themselves suffered damage when exposed to air, their paint faded within hours of excavation, and conservation techniques available in the 1970s proved inadequate. Many originally colorful figures are now the familiar terracotta brown because the pigments oxidized when exposed to oxygen. Chinese authorities point to this experience as a cautionary tale. Why risk destroying irreplaceable artifacts when waiting might allow future technology to do the job properly? This argument has substantial support among international archaeologists. The technology for preserving delicate organic materials, ancient metals, and especially anything in a mercury-rich environment has improved dramatically even in the past 20 years. But some researchers argue there's another dimension to the government's reluctance. The tomb likely contains records, texts, inscriptions, possibly even a library, that would provide unprecedented insight into the Qin dynasty and the emperor himself. What if those records contradict official historical narratives that modern China has built into national identity? What if they reveal inconvenient truths about the empire's founding, ethnic compositions of ancient populations, or relationships with neighboring cultures? The tomb isn't just an archaeological site, it's a political symbol. Opening it means releasing information that cannot be controlled, and authoritarian governments prefer controlled information. Now, let's be fair to the complexity of this situation. It's not as simple as government paranoia versus scientific curiosity. The tomb is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and a source of immense national pride. The Chinese government has invested heavily in studying the site using non-invasive techniques. Ground-penetrating radar, seismic surveys, and chemical analysis continue to reveal details about the tomb's structure without excavation. A 2020 study using muon tomography, the same technique used to discover hidden chambers in the Great Pyramid, confirmed the existence of large void spaces within the tumulus, consistent with Sima Qian's description of palace chambers. So research continues, just not through excavation. Then there are the legends, and these are particularly haunting. Beyond Sima Qian's official account, folk traditions speak of curses and guardians. Some stories claim that the emperor's tomb contains not just treasures but forbidden knowledge, texts describing advanced technologies that the emperor feared to share with his subjects, maps showing lands that officially don't exist in the historical record, or alchemical formulas that allegedly worked but were too dangerous for widespread use. Are these just elaborations on the mercury stories? Or do they reflect actual traditions passed down from those who worked on the tomb's construction? One persistent legend suggests that some of the workers who built the tomb's interior were buried alive inside to preserve its secrets. Sima Qian mentions that the craftsmen who designed the tomb's traps were sealed inside when it was closed. If true, their bodies might still be there, along with whatever they were trying to protect. Modern acoustic surveys have detected anomalies deep within the tumulus that some researchers interpret as chambers or passages not consistent with a simple burial vault. Could there be a more complex interior structure than officially acknowledged? Still, for all the technology and research, the central chamber remains sealed. We have tantalizing hints. The Mercury rivers are real, the underground palace probably exists, and there are almost certainly texts and artifacts inside that would be of immense historical value. But we cannot confirm what else might be there. Ancient Chinese records mention jade burial suits believed to preserve bodies, astronomical instruments of remarkable sophistication, and maps of the emperor's realm that might show extent of territories we don't associate with the Qin dynasty. The tomb might contain evidence of Chinese contact with Western civilizations, trade routes we don't know about, or technologies that disappeared when the dynasty fell. Picture yourself standing atop that grassy mound in Shaanxi province, the modern city of Xi'an visible in the distance. Beneath your feet, 140 feet down, past tons of earth and the outer protective structures, lies a chamber that no living person has seen. The first emperor of China lies there in darkness, surrounded by his treasures, guarded by his clay army, floating on rivers of poison that have flowed for 22 centuries. What would you choose to do? Open it now and risk destroying what you're trying to preserve? Wait for better technology that might never come? Or accept that some burials were meant to be permanent, that the ancient seals were placed for reasons that transcend modern curiosity? We still don't know what the first emperor took to his grave, or whether those Mercury rivers preserve secrets, as well as they preserve his body in its jade cocoon beneath the earth. But if you think sealed vaults are exclusively ancient phenomena, consider the Vatican Secret Archives. Though as of 2019, officially renamed the Vatican Apostolic Archives, perhaps in a belated attempt at public relations. Here we have a modern institution, in the heart of a European capital, maintaining repositories that are selectively accessible according to rules that seem designed to maximize speculation and minimize transparency. The archives contain approximately 53 miles of shelving holding documents, parchments, and records spanning 12 centuries of church history. And while scholars can technically apply for access to view certain materials, vast sections remain completely closed, viewable only by a handful of Vatican officials and restricted even from the archivists who maintain the collection. Let's establish what we know. The Vatican archives were formally established in 1612 by Pope Paul V, though the Church had been keeping records for centuries before that. The collection includes papal correspondence, state papers, account books, and the proceedings of church councils and tribunals. The historical value is unquestionable. These are primary source documents for medieval and Renaissance European history, religious development, diplomatic relations, and cultural exchange. Scholars who have gained access have found letters from Michelangelo, documents related to Galileo's trial, and correspondence about everything from crusade planning to missionary reports from around the world. In 2019, Pope Francis opened materials through 1939, including documents from Pope Pius XI's papacy, which allowed new research into the Church's response to the rise of fascism. So there is genuine scholarly access to significant portions of the archives. But here's where it gets tricky. Significant sections remain closed indefinitely. Documents related to ongoing investigations, materials deemed to involve living persons, and entire categories of sensitive records are completely off-limits. The rules governing access are Byzantine in complexity and applied inconsistently. A researcher might get permission to view one document but be denied access to another from the same period and office without explanation. Applications for access can take months or years and are frequently denied for reasons that are not provided. And then there are sections that are not even mentioned in the official catalog, areas of the archives that do not appear in any public documentation but that Vatican archivists quietly acknowledge exist. The famous Archivio Segreto Vaticano, the name that gave us the Secret Archives designation, contains materials so sensitive that even after the 2019 opening, documents past 1939 remain sealed, ostensibly to protect the privacy of persons who might still be alive or whose immediate families are living. But this explanation strains credibility when you consider that we're talking about documents from the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. The more likely explanation, according to historians who study the Vatican, is that these files contain material embarrassing or compromising to the Church, documents about financial dealings with fascist governments, correspondence about clergy abuse that was known and covered up, records of political maneuvering during the Cold War, and possibly evidence of church involvement in everything from money laundering to the sheltering of war criminals. These are serious accusations, and it's important to acknowledge that they remain unproven precisely because the evidence is inaccessible. But the pattern of selective transparency is suspicious. Why open documents through 1939 but not 1940? That one year, the year World War II expanded dramatically, becomes a curious cutoff point. Multiple researchers have requested access to materials from Pope Pius XII's papacy during World War II, particularly regarding the Vatican's knowledge of the Holocaust and its relationships with Nazi and fascist officials. The Church has published select documents claiming to show Pius XII's concern for Jewish persecution, but critics note that the Vatican can release documents that support its position while keeping contrary evidence sealed. This is precisely the problem with selective transparency. It allows an institution to control its own narrative. Now, let's be fair to the Vatican's position. They argue that the archives are private property of the Holy See, that they have legitimate interests in protecting sensitive information, and that they are far more open than they were even a generation ago. Pope Francis's 2019 decision to open materials through 1939 represented a significant increase in access. They point out that no institution is required to open all its records to public scrutiny, that many governments maintain classified archives for decades, and that the Church has unique responsibilities to protect confessional secrecy and pastoral privacy. These are not unreasonable arguments. But the mystery deepens when you consider what we know exists in sealed sections through second-hand accounts. Vatican archivists who have seen restricted materials have occasionally spoken, carefully and anonymously, about what they've encountered. References to extensive correspondence about the Magdalene laundries, the abusive Irish institutions where women were essentially imprisoned, and the Church's knowledge of conditions there. Files on exorcisms, including detailed accounts that supposedly document cases that cannot be explained through conventional psychology. Records of investigations into heresies and theological disputes that would challenge official doctrines. Correspondence with political leaders about covert operations during Cold War proxy conflicts. Financial records showing money flows that would be illegal, or at minimum embarrassing. And most intriguingly, references to documents much older than the archive's official founding date, including materials supposedly dating back to the earliest centuries of Christianity. This last category is particularly fascinating. If the Vatican possesses texts from the 1st or 2nd century CE, they might include Gospels, letters, or accounts that were excluded from the official biblical canon. Multiple early Christian texts are referenced by ancient writers but have never been found. The Gospel of the Hebrews, certain letters of Paul mentioned in canonical epistles, accounts of Jesus' childhood, and various Gnostic texts. The Vatican has never officially acknowledged possessing such materials, but scholars have noted curious references in catalog fragments and second-hand accounts that suggest very old documents exist in restricted sections. Then there are the outright legends, which range from plausible to wildly speculative. Some claim the archives contain evidence that would overturn core church doctrines, proof that Jesus was married, texts showing early Christianity was fundamentally different from modern practice, evidence of multiple competing early churches with divergent beliefs. Others suggest the Vatican holds documents proving historical conspiracies, truth about the Knights Templar, the real location of religious artifacts, evidence of church involvement in assassinations and political coups. The most extreme claims involve supernatural elements, possess texts that drive readers mad, prophecies about the end of times, documentation of demonic encounters that the Church has fought to suppress. Most of these legends are probably nonsense, elaborations built on the natural human tendency to imagine dark secrets in locked rooms. But some have kernels of truth. We know the Church conducted investigations into alleged possessions and maintained records of exorcisms. These are documented practices. We know the Vatican had extensive intelligence networks and diplomatic connections that allowed it to involve itself in political affairs. This is established history. We know that various alternative Christian texts existed in early centuries and were deliberately excluded from the canon. We have fragments and references that prove it. So the question becomes, How much of the legend is exaggeration and how much is simply unconfirmed fact? Still, for all the speculation, the core mystery remains: why maintain such extensive restrictions on historical documents? The standard answers about privacy and sensitivity don't fully explain sealing century-old materials or restricting access to theological records. The most logical explanation is also the most prosaic. The archives contain evidence of institutional corruption, moral failures, and politically inconvenient truths that would harm the Church's credibility and authority. This is not a conspiracy theory, it's how institutions operate. Every government, corporation, and organization tries to control information that might damage its reputation or power. The Vatican is simply more successful at it than most because it has sovereign status, no term limits on its leadership, and 12 centuries of practice. Picture yourself in those underground vaults beneath Vatican City, walking past row after row of shelving that extends into the darkness, each shelf packed with documents that could reshape our understanding of Christian history. You pull down a volume at random and open it to find not Latin but Greek, not medieval script but ancient uncial, a text from the 2nd century, possibly earlier, describing Jesus in terms that contradict everything you learned in Sunday school. Or maybe you find correspondence from 1943, letters between Vatican officials and German officers, discussing things that were never supposed to be acknowledged. What would you do with that information? Would revealing it serve truth and justice? Or would it simply provide ammunition for those who want to tear down institutions without considering what might replace them? We still don't know what the deepest shelves hold, what documents are marked never to be opened, or whether the Vatican's secrets are scandalous, sacred, or simply embarrassing in ways that have nothing to do with conspiracy and everything to do with human fallibility. Travel now to Egypt, where the Great Pyramid of Giza has guarded its secrets for 45 centuries, and where recent discoveries have revealed sealed chambers that challenge everything we thought we knew about the monument's purpose. The Great Pyramid, built around 2560 BC for Pharaoh Khufu, is the last surviving wonder of the ancient world, rising originally to 481 feet with an estimated 2.3 million stone blocks weighing an average of 2.5 tons each. For centuries, explorers and archaeologists believed we had found all the pyramid's chambers: the King's Chamber, the Queen's Chamber, the Grand Gallery, and various passages. But in 2017, an international team using neon particle detectors, a technique that measures cosmic ray particles passing through stone, announced the discovery of a massive void above the Grand Gallery, at least 98 feet long and with a similar cross-section to the gallery itself. This wasn't a construction gap or a small space. This was a chamber, intentionally created, sealed for over 4,000 years. And we have no idea why it's there or what it contains. The historical context of the Great Pyramid is crucial here. This wasn't just a tomb, it was a statement of power, religious belief, and architectural ambition on a scale that beggars description. The precision of its construction, aligned to true north to within 1/15 of a degree, with blocks fitted so tightly that you cannot slide a blade between them, demonstrates engineering sophistication that we still struggle to explain with Bronze Age tools. The internal chambers and passages incorporate astronomical alignments, mathematical relationships including pi and phi, and acoustic properties that suggest intentional design for purposes beyond simple burial. When Arab Caliph Al-Ma'mun's expedition forced entry into the pyramid in 820 CE, they found the king's chamber's sarcophagus empty and unsealed, with no evidence it had ever contained a burial. This has fueled centuries of speculation about the pyramid's true purpose. The new void, designated Scan Pyramid's Big Void by the Discovery Team, adds an entirely new dimension to these questions. Ground-penetrating radar, electromagnetic surveys, and repeated neon scans from multiple angles all confirm the space exists. It's not an artifact of the measurement technique. But the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities has been extraordinarily cautious about allowing any investigation that might damage the pyramid structure. No drilling, no excavation, no invasive techniques. This is understandable from a preservation standpoint, but it leaves us with confirmed evidence of a major chamber that we cannot access or even clearly image. What makes this void so mysterious is its location and size. It sits above the Grand Gallery, that magnificent ascending passage with corbelled walls that rise 28 feet high. Why would the builders create two massive voids, one above the other, separated by just a few feet of stone? The conventional explanation is that the void is a structural feature, a relieving chamber designed to distribute the enormous weight of stone above so it doesn't crush the Grand Gallery. This makes engineering sense. The King's Chamber has 5 relieving chambers above it serving exactly this purpose. But here's where it gets tricky. The Grand Gallery already has unusual architectural features that suggest structural stability wasn't the primary concern in its construction. The corbelled design itself distributes weight effectively. If the void above were purely structural, we might expect it to have a simple, functional design. But the muon scans suggest the void has the same complex geometry as the gallery below. It's not just an empty gap but a shaped space. This raises the question, was it designed to contain something? Alternative theories abound. Some researchers propose that the void is actually a hidden chamber that was sealed after placing objects or materials inside. The ancient Egyptians were known to hide burial goods in secret rooms to protect them from tomb robbers. Could the void contain Khufu's actual burial, with the known chambers serving as decoys? This would explain why the king's chamber sarcophagus was empty. But it raises new questions. Why go to such elaborate lengths when simpler hidden chambers could have been created? And if it was meant to be hidden, why create such a large space rather than a small, easily concealed cavity? Another hypothesis suggests the void served a ritual or religious function. Ancient Egyptian beliefs about the afterlife were complex, involving the soul's journey through various realms and the pharaoh's transformation into a divine being. What if the pyramid's internal structure was designed to facilitate this spiritual journey, with chambers and passages representing stages of transformation? The void might have been a ritual space where priests performed ceremonies, perhaps after the pharaoh's burial, before sealing the chamber forever. This theory is supported by ancient texts describing mysterious chambers of the gods within certain pyramids, though these references are fragmentary and subject to interpretation. Now, let's be fair to the most skeptical position. The void might be far less mysterious than it appears. It could be a construction gap, a space that resulted from building techniques we don't fully understand. The ancient builders might have created voids at various points in the construction process, intending to fill them later, but abandoned or modified their plans. The pyramid's interior has several strange features: the rough, unfinished state of some passages, the misalignment between certain elements, the odd proportions of some spaces, that suggest construction changes and adaptations. The void might simply be evidence of this evolutionary building process, interesting from an engineering standpoint, but not particularly mysterious. But then there are the legends, and these are where the Great Pyramid mystery truly takes on mythic dimensions. Arab historians recorded traditions that the pyramid contained chambers of knowledge, where ancient wisdom was preserved against a coming catastrophe. Medieval European accounts claimed the pyramid held treasures and magical artifacts from a pre-flood civilization. Modern esoteric traditions have built elaborate theories about the pyramid as an initiation temple, an astronomical observatory, a power plant, or even a machine for consciousness transformation. Most of these claims are easily dismissed as fantasy, but they point to a persistent intuition that the pyramid contains more than we've discovered. Here's what makes the sealed void genuinely tantalizing. It's accessible only through invasive techniques that might damage the structure, but non-invasive imaging cannot reveal fine details. We're in this frustrating middle ground where we know something is there but can't see what it is. It's like finding a locked safe but being forbidden to open it. Recent proposals have suggested using miniature robots that could be inserted through tiny drill holes, allowing cameras to explore the void without major structural damage. But even this approach has been controversial, with concerns about even minimal drilling and debates about who has authority to approve such investigations. Picture yourself standing in the king's chamber, that granite-lined room at the pyramid's heart where the air is still and the silence absolute. Above you, beyond tons of stone, lies a space that no person has entered for over 4 millennia. What's in there? The practical archaeologist in you thinks it's probably empty, just a structural void. But the romantic in you, the part that drove you to archaeology in the first place, imagines that moment when a camera finally penetrates the darkness and reveals, what? An empty chamber that matches the engineering predictions? Or something else, something that makes you question what you thought you knew about ancient Egypt, about the purpose of the pyramids, about the capabilities of Bronze Age civilization? We still don't know what the void contains, whether it was sealed by design or simply never accessed, or whether the Great Pyramid's secrets extend beyond architectural engineering into territories we haven't yet considered. Return with me now to the subcontinent, to a very different kind of sealed mystery in the jungles of Odisha, India, where a temple complex holds a chamber that physicians and rescue teams entered briefly in the 1990s, and immediately sealed again. The Jagannath Temple in Puri is one of Hinduism's most sacred sites, a vast complex covering some 400,000 square feet, with the main temple tower rising 214 feet above the crowds of pilgrims who visit by the millions each year. Built in its current form in the 12th century CE, the temple houses three principal deities and serves as the destination for the famous Rath Yatra festival where massive chariots carry the gods through the streets. But beneath the temple, in a chamber known as the Ratna Bandar or Treasure Vault, lies a sealed repository that has sparked controversy, legal battles, and ominous rumors for decades. The Ratna Bandar consists of two chambers, an outer chamber that was last officially opened in 1978 for inventory purposes, and an inner chamber that by most accounts has not been properly accessed since 1926. The outer chamber contained exactly what you'd expect in a temple treasury: gold ornaments, silver vessels, precious stones, and ritual objects accumulated over centuries of devotional offerings. Nothing mysterious there. But the inner chamber, according to temple records and eyewitness accounts from the 1920s, contains something that the temple administration has been extremely reluctant to examine. The official explanation has always been that the chamber is structurally unsafe, that opening it risks collapse, and that the contents are too valuable to risk without proper preparation. But here's where it gets tricky. In the 1990s, reports began circulating that some of the temple's structures were showing cracks, raising concerns about the vault's integrity. A team that included engineers and officials was assembled to assess the situation. They entered the outer chamber without incident. But when they opened the door to the inner chamber, several members of the team reportedly became violently ill almost immediately. One account describes rescue workers rushing in to pull out unconscious engineers. The official explanation was toxic gas, likely carbon monoxide or hydrogen sulfide, building up in a sealed environment over decades. The chamber was immediately resealed, additional barriers were put in place, and official access has been prohibited since. But the incident spawned persistent rumors that refused to die. Why would a simple accumulation of toxic gas affect people so quickly and so severely? Sealed environments do produce dangerous atmospheres, absolutely. The tomb of Tutankhamun and countless other sealed sites have had issues with accumulated gases. But the Ratna Bandar is not hermetically sealed. It's a stone chamber in a temple complex where air circulation, however minimal, should prevent the kind of concentrated toxic buildup that causes instant unconsciousness. Some engineers who have studied the temple's structure suggest that the chamber might be connected to natural underground cavities or water sources that could produce unusual atmospheric conditions. This is plausible, but it doesn't fully explain the reported severity of the incident, or the institutional reluctance to investigate further. Now, let's be fair to multiple perspectives on this mystery. The temple administration and the Odisha state government have legitimate concerns about preservation, safety, and religious sanctity. The Jagannath Temple is not just an archaeological site, it's a living place of worship central to the identity of millions of Hindus. Decisions about accessing the vault involve balancing archaeological interests, safety protocols, legal jurisdiction, and religious sensitivities. In 2018, the Odisha High Court ordered that the vaults be opened for inventory and preservation purposes, but the order has been stayed multiple times amid appeals arguing that such access violates religious autonomy and risks damaging priceless artifacts. These are serious concerns. If the inner chamber does contain ancient artifacts or texts, Exposing them to modern atmosphere without proper preparation could cause catastrophic deterioration. The lesson of the terracotta warriors, whose paint faded upon exposure to air, is instructive here. But then there are the alternative theories, and these get into territory that requires careful consideration. Some researchers point to historical accounts suggesting that the inner Ratnabandha chamber was sealed not just to protect treasures but to contain something specific. Temple records from the British colonial period reference items in the vault that were considered unsuitable for public viewing. What does that mean? Unsuitable because they're religiously sensitive? Because they're culturally controversial? Or because they're physically dangerous? The toxic gas explanation could cover any of these possibilities while avoiding specifics. There's also a persistent local tradition that the inner chamber contains not just material wealth but texts and objects related to practices that were suppressed or forbidden in later periods of Hindu development. Ancient India had extensive traditions of alchemy, metallurgy, medicine, and what we might call proto-science that don't fit neatly into modern categorizations. Some of these practices involved mercury, arsenic, and other substances that are toxic but were believed to have transformative properties. Could the inner chamber contain experimental materials or alchemical preparations that are genuinely hazardous? This would explain both the toxic atmosphere and the institutional reluctance to fully investigate. Then there are the legends that venture into more mythological territory. Stories circulate in Puri that the inner chamber was sealed because it contains manifestations or residues of divine presence that are too powerful for ordinary human exposure. In Hindu theology, particularly in the Shakta traditions, certain manifestations of divine energy can be literally dangerous to unprepared individuals. The concept of seeing or touching the divine and being overwhelmed by the experience is not metaphorical in these traditions. It describes an actual hazardous encounter with forces beyond human tolerance. Skeptics will rightly dismiss this as religious mythology, but it's worth noting that the people who maintain this belief are not primitive villagers. They're educated priests and administrators who nevertheless take these theological concepts seriously. Still, for all the theories and traditions, we're left with a frustrating situation: a sealed chamber in a documented building, with confirmed reports of danger associated with its opening, but no clear explanation and no current plan for proper investigation. The legal battles continue, with various parties arguing about who has authority to order the vault opened, what safety measures would be adequate, and whether preservation concerns override public interest in documenting the contents. Meanwhile, the inner chamber remains sealed, its contents unknown, its atmosphere apparently hazardous, and its mysteries protected by a combination of bureaucratic caution, religious prohibition, and genuine uncertainty about what might happen if the seals are broken. Picture yourself in that moment in the 1990s when the door swings open and the first breath of air escapes from the inner chamber. You smell something wrong immediately, not the musty scent of age but something acrid, chemical, threatening. The engineers step forward, and within seconds they're stumbling backward, gasping. Later, when you ask them what they saw in that brief moment before the chamber had to be resealed, they give vague answers. Darkness. Stone. Shapes they couldn't quite identify before the need for fresh air became overwhelming. What did they see? What did they smell? What was it about that specific chamber that made even a brief exposure dangerous? And perhaps most unsettling, if it was just accumulated toxic gas, why hasn't the temple administration simply implemented proper ventilation and safety protocols to allow investigation? What are they still concerned about? We still don't know what the inner Ratnabandha contains, whether the danger is environmental, chemical, or something that doesn't fit our usual categories of hazard. But perhaps the most philosophically troubling sealed vault is one that exists by bureaucratic prohibition rather than physical barrier: the extensive network of chambers and passages beneath the Giza plateau that Edgar Cayce's readings claim to document, and that the Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities has consistently denied permission to explore. Now, before you dismiss this as New Age nonsense, consider the documented facts. There are definitely unmapped cavities beneath the plateau. Ground-penetrating radar, seismic surveys, and electromagnetic imaging have all confirmed the existence of voids, chambers, and passages under the desert around the pyramids. The question is not whether they exist but what they are, what they contain, and why access to investigate them has been so tightly controlled. Edgar Cayce, the famous American psychic who died in 1945, made numerous trance readings about ancient Egypt, claiming that beneath the Sphinx and pyramids lay a hall of records, containing artifacts and texts from a pre-Egyptian civilization he called Atlantis, dating back to approximately 10,500 BCE. He predicted this chamber would be discovered before the end of the 20th century and would contain proof of advanced ancient civilization. Skeptics rightfully point out that Cayce's predictions did not come true as specified. No hall of records was found by 2000, and the entire Atlantis narrative lacks archaeological support. Fair enough. But here's what makes this interesting. Independent geophysical surveys conducted in the 1990s and early 2000s did detect large anomalies beneath the Sphinx, between its paws and extending back under its body. In 1991, researcher John Anthony West and geologist Robert Schoch conducted investigations suggesting the Sphinx shows evidence of water erosion from a period when the Egyptian climate was much wetter, potentially pushing the monument's origins back thousands of years before the conventional date of 2500 BCE. This sparked intense controversy in Egyptology, with mainstream scholars defending the traditional chronology but unable to fully explain the erosion patterns Schoch documented. Requests to conduct exploratory drilling or excavation beneath the Sphinx have been consistently denied by Egyptian authorities. In 1998, Dr. Sacsayhuamán, then director of the Giza Plateau, acknowledged the existence of tunnels and chambers beneath the Sphinx but characterized them as natural cavities of no archaeological significance. No comprehensive survey results have ever been published. No excavation has been permitted. The official position is that the known structures around Giza are sufficient for current research priorities, and that disturbing the plateau's geology would risk destabilizing the monuments. This is not an unreasonable position from a preservation standpoint, but it creates a frustrating situation where we have confirmed evidence of subsurface structures that we're forbidden to investigate. Now, let's be fair about the challenges here. The Giza Plateau is not just an archaeological site. It's a symbol of Egyptian national identity, a major tourist attraction, and a politically sensitive location. Any discovery that challenged conventional chronology or suggested pre-dynastic advanced civilization would have profound implications for how Egypt presents its history to the world and to itself. Moreover, the history of Western archaeology in Egypt is fraught with colonial exploitation. Museums around the world hold Egyptian artifacts taken without proper consent, and Egyptian authorities are understandably protective of their heritage. They have every right to control access and to prioritize preservation over Western researchers' curiosity. But the mystery deepens when you consider what independent researchers claim to have found. Ground-penetrating radar surveys from the 1990s, conducted by various teams before access became more restricted, reported rectangular cavities beneath the Sphinx's paws, chamber-like voids under the causeway connecting the Sphinx to the pyramids, and passage-like structures extending from the Sphinx temple toward the Nile Valley. Some of these features aligned with ancient accounts. The historian Herodotus mentioned underground passages at Giza. Pliny the Elder referenced a well shaft leading to deep caverns beneath the pyramids, and Arab medieval texts described elaborate tunnel systems where priests performed secret rituals. Were these accounts pure invention? Or were they describing real structures that later became inaccessible or forgotten? The most intriguing piece of evidence is also the most controversial. In the 1990s, a German robotics team was granted limited permission to explore shafts leading from the Queen's Chamber and the Great Pyramid. They discovered what appeared to be doors at the ends of the shafts, blocks with copper fittings that seemed to close off whatever lay beyond. In 2002, a robot drilled through one of these doors live on television, revealing a small chamber and another door beyond. The project was discontinued before further exploration, and subsequent investigations have been limited and their results not fully published. Why? The official explanation is that the shafts are part of the pyramid's internal architecture and don't lead to significant chambers, making further investigation unnecessary damage to the structure. But researchers who have seen the footage and data note curious details: the precision of the doors, the copper fittings that suggest functionality rather than decoration, and geometric anomalies in the small chamber that hint at intentional design. Then there are the theoretical frameworks that try to make sense of all this. Some researchers propose that the pyramids and Sphinx were built in stages over thousands of years, with the oldest sections dating to a much earlier period than conventionally accepted. This would explain anomalies like the water erosion on the Sphinx, the apparent astronomical alignments that point to alignments relevant around 10,500 BC, and the sophisticated mathematical relationships in the Great Pyramid's dimensions that seem unlikely for the conventionally dated period. Other researchers suggest that the subsurface structures are from an entirely different phase of activity, perhaps pre-dynastic, or even from a culture that preceded recognized Egyptian civilization. This is where we enter highly speculative territory. There is no confirmed evidence of advanced pre-Egyptian civilization in the Nile Valley. The archaeological record shows clear development from Neolithic settlements through pre-dynastic cultures into the First Dynasty around 3100 BC. But the sealed chambers beneath Giza represent a gap in our knowledge. Until they're properly investigated, we can't definitively say what's not down there. Still, for all the speculation, the practical reality is that the subsurface voids beneath Giza remain inaccessible to comprehensive investigation. The Egyptian government maintains tight control, and given the political sensitivities and preservation concerns, this is unlikely to change soon. We are left with confirmed geophysical anomalies, historical references to underground passages, and a growing body of evidence suggesting the Giza complex has hidden dimensions we haven't fully explored. Picture yourself standing between the Sphinx's paws, the weathered limestone warm under your hand, the pyramid rising behind you against the desert sky. Beneath your feet, according to multiple independent surveys, there are voids, chambers, passages. What's down there? Probably nothing more than natural cavities and perhaps some subsidiary structures related to the monument's construction. But maybe, just maybe, there's something that would make us reconsider what we think we know about the timeline of civilization, the capabilities of ancient people, and the stories they told about their own origins. We still don't know what lies beneath the Sphinx's paws, whether Casey's visions had any basis in reality, or why access to investigate remains so tightly controlled that even non-invasive scanning is discouraged. Cross the Atlantic with me now to Peru, where in the Andean highlands near Cusco lies perhaps the most puzzling sealed mystery in South America, the intricate system of underground passages beneath Sacsayhuamán, the megalithic complex whose stone blocks, some weighing over 200 tons, fit together with such precision that a knife blade cannot penetrate the joints. The Spanish chronicler Pedro Cieza de Leon, writing in the 16th century, described tunnels and passages so great and so deep that those who enter them can walk for great distances underground. Local Inca legends speak of a vast subterranean network connecting Sacsayhuamán to other sites throughout the Cusco region, including the Coricancha Temple in the city center, over 2 miles away. But here's the crucial detail. These tunnels were deliberately sealed by the Spanish conquistadors in the 1500s, allegedly to prevent their use by Inca resistance fighters, and they remain sealed to this day. The historical context is essential. Sacsayhuamán, built in the 15th century by the Inca Empire, though possibly incorporating much older structures, was a massive ceremonial and defensive complex. The megalithic walls, constructed from blocks that could weigh up to 300 tons, demonstrate engineering capabilities that puzzle modern architects. How did Inca builders, working without iron tools, wheels, or draft animals, quarry, transport, and precisely fit these enormous stones? The conventional answer involves bronze tools, log rollers, earthen ramps, and tremendous labor forces. The Inca did have organizational capacity for massive projects. But the precision of the stonework, with complex polygonal blocks fitting in 3 dimensions with tolerances of less than a millimeter, suggests techniques we don't fully understand. When the Spanish arrived in 1536, they besieged the complex and eventually took it after fierce fighting. Contemporary accounts describe Inca defenders appearing and disappearing mysteriously, leading the Spanish to conclude that underground passages allowed movement between parts of the fortress and possibly to the city below. After securing the site, the Spanish systematically sealed entrances to underground passages they found, sometimes by collapsing tunnels, other times by building walls across entrance points. The goal was strategic: eliminate the tactical advantage the tunnels provided to Inca resistance. But the result was to create a sealed underground labyrinth that has never been comprehensively mapped or explored. What makes this mystery particularly frustrating is that we have documentary evidence of the tunnel's existence and function. Spanish chroniclers wrote about them. Inca accounts, recorded by mestizo writers like Garcilaso de la Vega, describe the passage network in detail. Modern investigations have confirmed that there are indeed voids beneath Sacsayhuamán. Ground-penetrating radar and seismic studies have detected passages, chambers, and anomalies consistent with artificial tunnels. But Peruvian authorities have been extremely reluctant to authorize excavation. The official concerns are valid. Sacsayhuamán is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Excavation could destabilize the megalithic structures, and there are cultural sensitivities around disturbing Inca sacred sites. The indigenous communities of the region have mixed feelings about opening the tunnels. Some see it as recovering lost heritage, others as violation of sacred space. Now, let's be fair to the complexities of this situation. Peru's relationship with its pre-Columbian heritage is complicated by centuries of colonialism, exploitation, and cultural appropriation. Western archaeologists have often treated Inca and pre-Inca sites as resources to be mined for knowledge and artifacts, with insufficient respect for the descendants and cultural heirs of those civilizations. Contemporary Peruvian archaeology tries to balance research interests with indigenous rights and cultural preservation. This means that even when there's scientific value in exploring sealed sites, there may be legitimate reasons to proceed slowly or not at all. But here's where it gets tricky. Local accounts suggest that some of the passages have been partially explored by unauthorized individuals over the centuries, and the stories they tell are tantalizing. Reports describe underground rooms filled with carved stonework, passages that extend for miles, chambers with artificially cut walls and ceilings, and even intersections where multiple tunnels meet. One frequently repeated account from the 1920s describes explorers entering the tunnels with authorization to map them, penetrating several hundred meters before encountering a section where the passage widened into a larger chamber. They reported seeing stone carvings, what appeared to be storage niches, and additional passages leading deeper. But they also reported disorientation, fear, and the unsettling feeling of being in a space far larger than they'd anticipated. The expedition ended without completing the mapping, and the entrance they used was subsequently sealed. Why would the Inca create such an extensive underground network? The conventional explanation is that the tunnels served defensive and logistical purposes, allowing movement of troops and supplies during sieges, providing water access, and creating escape routes. This is entirely plausible. Many ancient fortifications included tunnel systems for exactly these reasons. But the descriptions from chroniclers suggest something beyond simple military functionality. References to temples beneath the earth, to ceremonial spaces where rituals were performed away from public view, and to storage chambers for sacred objects hint at religious or cultural purposes beyond tactical advantage. Inca religion incorporated underground spaces as symbolically significant. The Lucucacha, or lower world, was a crucial element of their cosmic geography. Creating sacred spaces beneath Sacsayhuamán would align with these beliefs, suggesting the tunnels were not just practical infrastructure but part of the site's spiritual architecture. Then there are the legends, and these take us into territory that blends historical memory with mythic elaboration. Local traditions speak of the tunnels containing treasure, gold and silver taken from temples and hidden during the Spanish invasion to prevent its seizure and melting into bullion. This is historically credible. We know the Inca did hide sacred objects from the conquistadors, and many of those objects were never recovered. Could the sealed tunnels beneath Sacsayhuamán contain ceremonial artifacts, gold work, and cultural treasures? It's certainly possible. But the legends go further, describing not just treasure but libraries of quipus, the knotted string records the Inca used for accounting and possibly for more complex information encoding. The Spanish destroyed most quipus they found, considering them instruments of idolatry. If collections of quipus survived in sealed chambers, they might contain administrative records, historical accounts, or even literary works that would revolutionize our understanding of Inca civilization. Some researchers have suggested that quipus could encode far more complex information than conventionally believed, possibly including narrative histories and cultural knowledge. A cache of preserved quipus could test these theories. The most mythic versions of the legend claim that the deepest tunnels contain chambers from pre-Inca civilizations, possibly connecting to sites built by the Wari or even earlier cultures. This ventures into very speculative territory, but it's worth noting that Sacsayhuamán does show evidence of construction in multiple phases, and some stonework appears stylistically different from what we associate with the Inca. Could the site incorporate older structures, and could tunnels from earlier periods exist alongside Inca additions? Archaeological precedent exists for cultures incorporating and building upon earlier sites. Still, for all the evidence and speculation, the tunnels remain sealed. A few sections have been partially cleared and are shown to tourists, short passages that demonstrate the construction techniques but don't extend into the deeper network. The bulk of the underground system remains inaccessible, sealed by Spanish walls, collapsed sections, and modern bureaucratic prohibition. Requests to conduct comprehensive exploration using modern techniques have been debated for decades without resolution. Preservationists worry about damage to the megalithic structures above. Cultural activists raise concerns about respecting sacred space. And everyone agrees that if exploration happens, it should be done with cutting-edge preservation technology, indigenous community involvement, and priorities that go beyond mere curiosity or treasure hunting. Picture yourself standing on the megalithic walls of Sacsayhuamán, the massive stones solid beneath your feet, the Cusco Valley stretching below, the Andes rising in the distance. Beneath you, according to maps and accounts going back 5 centuries, there's a labyrinth. Passages cut through living rock. Chambers whose purposes we can only guess. And perhaps, in the deepest sections that no modern person has seen, remnants of Inca civilization that the Spanish never found, that looters never plundered, waiting in darkness for the day someone breaks the seals and lets light back in. What would we find? Military infrastructure and storage rooms? Sacred ceremonial spaces? Hidden treasure? Libraries of quipus that could rewrite Inca history? Or simply empty passages whose significance was overestimated by both the Inca who built them and the Spanish who feared them? We still don't know what lies in the sealed tunnels beneath Sacsayhuamán, whether the legends of treasure and libraries have any basis, or whether modern Peru will ever decide that the potential knowledge justifies the risks and complexities of opening the ancient seals. And so we return to where we began, standing before sealed doors and confronting the uncomfortable question: why are we so compelled by what we cannot see? Each of these sealed vaults, from the Sanskrit lock chamber in Kerala to the Mercury rivers beneath Shanxi, from the restricted archives in Vatican City to the hidden voids in Giza, from the toxic chamber in Puri to the labyrinth beneath Sacsayhuamán, represents a different kind of barrier between present and past, between knowledge and mystery, between what we're allowed to know and what we're forbidden to discover. These are not ancient legends or unverified claims. These are documented sites in modern nations, places you could visit tomorrow, sealed by decisions that were made deliberately, for reasons that seemed important at the time and that perhaps still are. What strikes me most profoundly about these mysteries is not the sealed chambers themselves but what they reveal about us, about the relationship between institutions and knowledge, between power and information, between the past and those of us trying to understand it. Every sealed vault represents a decision. Someone, at some point, decided that whatever lay inside should not be accessible. Sometimes that decision was made for religious reasons: the sacred must remain inviolate. Sometimes for political reasons: truth might be inconvenient. Sometimes for practical reasons: preservation requires patience. And sometimes for reasons we can barely comprehend, motivations rooted in worldviews so different from our own that we struggle to even frame the question correctly. The Padmanabhaswamy Temple's Vault B challenges our assumptions about religious authority and secular knowledge. Does the state have the right to inventory sacred spaces? Do religious communities have the authority to keep cultural heritage hidden from documentation? There's no simple answer, and both sides make compelling arguments. But the vault remains sealed, And that seal represents a negotiation between modernity and tradition, between transparency and faith, between collective heritage and religious autonomy. The question isn't just, what's in the vault? But, who gets to decide whether we look? Emperor Qin Shi Huang's tomb presents a different challenge, the tension between preservation and discovery. We have the technology to learn more, but using it might destroy what we're trying to study. How long should we wait? What if better technology never comes? What if waiting means the tomb deteriorates naturally to the point where even future techniques cannot recover what's inside? These aren't abstract questions. They're being debated right now by Chinese archaeologists, international heritage experts, and government officials trying to balance competing priorities. The mercury rivers are real, the hidden chambers exist, and somewhere beneath that grassy mound lies information that could reshape our understanding of ancient China. But the price of discovery might be the destruction of discovery, a paradox with no clear resolution. The Vatican Archives force us to confront the reality that institutions control information to serve institutional interests. This is neither surprising nor particularly nefarious. It's how organizations operate. But it creates a fundamental asymmetry. The Church can claim that controversial historical claims are unsupported by evidence while simultaneously keeping evidence that might support those claims locked away from scrutiny. This isn't unique to the Vatican. Governments, corporations, and organizations worldwide control access to their records, shape their own narratives, and maintain secrets that serve their interests. What makes the Vatican Archives particularly significant is the time scale, 12 centuries of accumulated records, and the cultural impact. These aren't just administrative files. They're documents that could illuminate or complicate our understanding of Christianity, European history, and the complex relationship between religious and political power. That they remain partially sealed tells us something important about how history is constructed and who gets to do the constructing. The Great Pyramid's sealed void represents the frustration of confirmed mystery. We know it's there. We can measure it. But we cannot see inside without potentially damaging the structure we're trying to study. It's tantalizing precisely because it's so close. Just feet of stone separate us from a space that has been sealed for 45 centuries. Will we open it? Eventually, probably. Technology improves constantly. But the decision of when and how involves weighing irreplaceable heritage against human curiosity, balancing the risk of loss against the possibility of discovery. And whatever we find, whether it's an empty structural void or something that challenges our understanding of ancient Egypt, the real discovery might be less about the chamber itself and more about what the opening tells us about our own values and priorities. The sealed chamber in Puri's Jagannath Temple reminds us that not all barriers are institutional or bureaucratic. Some are physical, environmental, genuinely hazardous. The toxic atmosphere, whether from natural gas accumulation or chemical contamination from ancient materials, represents a kind of seal we cannot simply decree away. Even if religious and legal barriers were removed tomorrow, the physical danger remains real. This is perhaps the most honest kind of mystery, one where nature itself, rather than human decision, keeps secrets. It forces us to develop better technology, better safety protocols, and better preservation techniques before we can proceed. There's a humility in that, an acknowledgement that some knowledge requires not just permission but capability. The tunnels beneath Sacsayhuamán represent the violent imposition of secrecy. The Spanish sealed those passages not to preserve them but to eliminate their utility, to cut off resistance, and eliminate tactical advantage. That those seals have remained for 5 centuries is less about deliberate preservation than about the tunnels fading from priority as other concerns took precedence. But now, trying to decide whether to unseal them involves navigating the complicated legacy of colonialism, the rights of indigenous communities, and the practical challenges of underground archaeology. The sealed tunnels contain not just Inca infrastructure but layers of historical trauma, and deciding whether to open them means confronting that history as much as recovering it. What unites all these sealed vaults, despite their different contexts and challenges, is that they represent the limits of our knowledge and the choices we make about those limits. We live in an age that celebrates transparency, that treats information as inherently democratizing, That assumes more knowledge is always better than less. But these sealed chambers challenge that assumption. They suggest that sometimes secrecy serves purposes we should respect, that not all knowledge is meant for all people, that preservation might require patience that exceeds individual lifetimes. They also remind us that power and knowledge are inseparable, that whoever controls access to information shapes what we can know about the past. But here's what I find most moving about these mysteries: they keep us humble. In an age where we map genomes and photograph black holes, where information seems infinitely accessible and nothing seems truly unknowable, these sealed vaults remind us that there are still secrets, still locked rooms, still chambers that we cannot or should not enter. They preserve a sense of mystery that increasingly feels absent from modern life. When everything can be Googled, when every question seems answerable, when the world feels thoroughly mapped and categorized, these sealed spaces represent genuine unknowns. And perhaps we need that. Perhaps part of being human is living with questions we cannot answer, mysteries we cannot solve, doors we cannot open. Perhaps the sealed vault serves a purpose beyond what it contains. It reminds us that we do not know everything, that the past still holds secrets, that our understanding of history remains partial and provisional. This doesn't mean we should stop seeking answers. We should continue developing better technology, having serious conversations about preservation and access, respecting cultural sensitivities while pursuing knowledge. We should keep pushing at the boundaries, asking for better evidence, demanding transparency where it's appropriate. But we should also recognize that some seals will remain in place, that some vaults will stay locked, and that this might not be entirely a bad thing. The sealed vault represents potential, the tantalizing possibility that somewhere, beneath stone or behind iron doors or in restricted archives, there's information that could change everything we think we know. And as long as that possibility exists, as long as those seals remain unbroken, that potential remains infinite. Open the vault and you get an answer, maybe a revolutionary one, maybe a disappointing one, but a definite answer. Keep it sealed and the mystery persists, the potential remains, and the questions continue to haunt us. So what happens now? Some of these vaults will eventually be opened. Technology will improve, political situations will change, preservation methods will advance to the point where the risks become acceptable. We will probably see inside the Great Pyramid's void within our lifetimes. We might eventually access more Vatican archives as papacies change and transparency pressures increase. Perhaps someday Peru will decide that recovering Inca heritage justifies carefully opening sections of the Sacsayhuamán tunnels. And when those moments come, we'll learn something, maybe something transformative, maybe something modest, but something. Other vaults will likely remain sealed indefinitely. Vault B in Padmanabhaswamy may never be opened if religious authorities maintain their position and Indian courts continue to respect it. The innermost chambers of Puri's Ratna Bandar may remain too hazardous to access without technology that doesn't yet exist. The deepest subsurface structures at Giza may stay unexplored because the risks to the monuments above are deemed too great. And that's okay. Not every mystery needs to be solved. Not every question requires an answer. Some of the sealed vaults we've explored tonight will give up their secrets. Others will keep them. And in a strange way, both outcomes serve the same purpose. They connect us to the past, to the people who built these chambers and made the decisions to seal them. They remind us that history is not dead facts in textbooks but living questions that each generation must confront anew. They preserve a sense of wonder that gets harder to find as we map every square inch of the planet and digitize every scrap of accessible information. The sealed vault matters not just because of what it might contain but because it exists at all, because someone thought it important enough to lock away, because centuries or millennia later we still wonder what lies inside. So keep wondering. Keep asking questions. Keep demanding transparency where it's appropriate, and respecting boundaries where they're necessary. Keep developing better technology and better frameworks for balancing preservation with discovery. Keep having difficult conversations about who owns the past and who has the right to access it. And keep recognizing that some of the most important mysteries are the ones we cannot solve, the questions we cannot answer, the doors we cannot or should not open. Because somewhere, right now, beneath your feet if you happen to be standing in Kerala or Shanxi or Rome or Giza or Puri or Cusco, there's a sealed chamber. And whatever it contains has been waiting in darkness for longer than you've been alive, possibly longer than your civilization has existed. It will still be there tomorrow. It might still be there centuries from now. And that persistence, that patient keeping of secrets, that refusal to yield to our curiosity without cost or consequence, that's what makes the sealed vault one of humanity's most enduring mysteries. Keep digging, keep searching, keep questioning. Because some secrets still lie just beneath your feet, waiting behind locked doors, sealed by decisions made long ago for reasons we can barely understand. And until we're ready, technologically, ethically, culturally ready, to open those seals properly, the mystery persists, the questions remain, and the sealed vault keeps its silence.